I guess to introduce ourselves, my name's Evan Schweitz. I have been at Metro Transit for almost 12 years. I serve currently as the senior transit planner. So, my role is to look at how the city is growing and changing and how our service best adapts to those changes to make sure within our budget we're providing the best service possible for our.
My name's Jason Rose. I'm the Communications and Community Relations Manager at Metro Transit. I've been there for 5 years. My role is mostly kind of the public facing communications pieces, engaging with community groups such as yourselves. MoShift was actually one of the first groups I ever met with when I first started here. You guys have been fantastic, the entire time. So we have a couple projects coming up that I'll mention that we would love your input on, but we're just excited to be here. Thanks for having us. And I'm a bus commuter myself, bus and bike primarily. I live near the zoo with my wife, and we have 3 kids and 1 vehicle, and she and the kids usually take the vehicle. So I usually take bus Route 13. I live like a block and a half from my bus stop, and I just have a straight shot into work, which is really fun for me. But today we're going to talk about, and Evan, maybe if you want to bring those slides up, great. So the main focus for today is going to be our MetroNext project. It's our community engagement and strategic planning initiative that we will be carrying on throughout the rest of this year and into next year a little bit. Before we start though, I do want to mention a few things because there are some new faces that I'm seeing on the call. So Metro is the public transit provider for the city. We offer 4 different types of service. We have fixed and express route buses. Those are the 30 to 40 foot buses. You'll see typically they're white with blue stripes, and they either run along fixed routes regularly throughout the weekday and weekends. Service varies depending on the route, time of day, and day of the week. And then our express routes run usually during commuting hours, and that's Monday through Friday for work commuters. And those go from park and ride lots kind of in the outer parts of the city, and they feed to the central part of the city. We recently launched Orbit, which is it stands for Omaha Rapid Bus Transit. It's our BRT line from West Roads to downtown. We kicked that off in November of last year. And so that's our newest service type. And then we also have Mobi, which is our paratransit ADA accessible service. And then I'll just kind of cue Evan to hit the next slides because he's steering the ship for us. Before we dive into MetroNext, I wanted to mention a couple exciting initiatives that we have going on. The first is a pilot program called K-12 Rides Free. And it was through partnership with the Chamber, the Great Omaha Chamber, and local philanthropy. We were able to fund a 1-year pilot project to let any K through 12 student ride transit for free anywhere in the system, anytime we're running. The only thing that we need is that a high school student show their student ID, their school issued ID. And if there's anyone in high school that doesn't have a school issued ID, we can provide one. We would just need them to come to our office, and we can print off a little yellow Metro ID for them. And we've been pretty, due to the pandemic and school policies around ID distribution and whatnot, we are allowing folks to use previous year IDs, or if they have an alternate type of identification, we can take that as well. Because we know it's been a little hectic to get formal school issued IDs recently. So that's a really exciting project. It goes until June 1st of next year. And so what we're going to be doing is tracking the ridership and the data and getting some feedback from our schools to hopefully make the case that this should be a longer term, maybe a more permanent fixture in our fare products. So that's a pretty exciting one. And then Evan, next slide. So we were kind of chatting about this before we formally started, but we are in the process of rolling out an upgraded fare payment system to include smart cards and a mobile app. The screen kind of shows a new card reader. And this is at first just going to be an addition to the current system, and eventually it will become the system that we'll use primarily. But the idea here is that it's an account-based system, so you can manage your account on either an app or on the website. And that allows you to store and keep the value that you have in your account rather than on a card. So right now, if you have like a value card or a 10 ride card and you lose it or it gets damaged or anything like that, you can replace it. You can come in and replace it, but if you lose it, it's gone. So in this case, the value is actually just in your account, and it goes with you. So and you know, for the ease of access of just having a tap card or a mobile app, and not having to have paper passes or have to carry cash or anything like that. So I'm really excited to introduce it. We are really excited to introduce it, and we'll be actually putting together a beta test group. And I'm hoping that I can get some mode shifters, and maybe if you guys have any ideas and thoughts on who else might be interested, we can add them to the group. But we're looking for kind of a cohort of people to test it out, to start using it and give us feedback on what the user experience is like, and you know, any tweaks we might need to make to make it as functional and accessible as possible. So I will follow up probably with Liz maybe later this week on kind of how to get involved in that. But look for that coming soon. All right, next slide. Okay, so kind of digging into the MetroNext piece, I just wanted to touch briefly on where we are as an agency right now, because that's really the idea behind MetroNext is, okay, we know where we are, we're in a really interesting place, but we need to kind of have a clear guiding star on where we're going. We just launched Orbit. We have some exciting momentum and energy around that new service, but then there's a lot of energy around transit and transportation as a whole. You know, there's all the work that you guys are doing, the bikeway that just rolled out today, all the momentum with Connect Go in the chamber, and we have a really good collaboration there with a lot of partners around the city, where there is a very real demand for more robust transit. So we are taking kind of this moment to step back and do some analysis and do some engagement to figure out where we're going in the next 5 to 10 years. But where we are now, so yeah, we are officially the Transit Authority of the City of Omaha. We've been running public transit here since 1972. Prior to that, it was kind of a collection of private organizations, and much of it was kind of streetcar driven. And we are governed by a 5-member board of directors, and that board is appointed by the mayor. And we report up through the Federal Transit Administration, which is a body of the Federal Department of Transportation. Our budget this year is about $33 million. The majority of that, we have a kind of a budget pie chart on the screen. About 58% of that comes from property taxes, 23% coming from federal funds. And those federal funds, there's a variety of different funding programs that we utilize, from sort of ongoing annual recurring funds that we get every year based on a variety of factors that we provide to the federal government. And then there are some more competitive funding programs that we get into for things like larger capital projects or like different things like that, things that are kind of outside of our normal day-to-day operations. A small portion of our budget comes from fares, about 10%, and then 8% comes from state and local funds, most of that through the state of Nebraska, and then a sliver of other revenue that we get from things like advertising. Next slide, Evan. So shown on the screen here is a transit spending per capita chart. This is in 2019 dollars, but it kind of has been trending about this way for the last 5 or so years. And Omaha is shown at $40 per capita. That's the spending that we allocate, or that we receive on an annual basis per capita to provide transit funding. Coming in just above Oklahoma City, who's at $36. But this is, we show this because as we talk about growing our system and prioritizing public transit in Omaha, this is a major factor for us. And this is going to be something to look at when we have new options. We also need to consider how we're going to pay for them. I have conversations with lots of people, a lot of people in this group, and I'm sure you've had these experiences where you go to other cities like a Kansas City or a Des Moines or a Minneapolis or Denver or Portland or Seattle, and have these like really incredible transit experiences, and then you might have a different one coming back here, and then these factors, primarily funding, is a huge reason for that. So that's a factor as we move toward a more robust system that will be considering and will be a piece of the MetroNext study. But in spite of that, and Evan, if you want to go to the next slide, I mentioned some of the federal funding.
Talk about Lincoln.
Oh yeah, so Lincoln. Well, do you want to talk? You talk about Lincoln.
Yeah, sorry to like heckle from the crowd. I just think it's interesting to point out that Lincoln, Nebraska, even though it's a smaller city, smaller budget, smaller transit system, what they're spending per capita is $55, where Omaha's $40 per person. So even within the state, we're kind of lagging in terms of how much we prioritize public transport.
Indeed. So even kind of in the midst of that budget piece of it, there are really great opportunities for us to find ways to fund new services. So Orbit's a great example. Orbit launched again in November of last year. And a huge, about half of the total project cost. And really the thing that spurred the project forward and kicked it off in the first place was a federal Tiger grant. Tiger was the name of the program in 2014, the competitive grant program that we won a grant for. And we were one of, I want to say 72 recipients out of like, what was it, 700 or something? A lot of people applied, a lot of organizations applied, and we were one of a handful that got a competitive grant. So those competitive grant programs are really critical for us being able to roll out new services. And there are a selection of those coming out of the federal government. And those are things that we stay tuned pretty closely to as those programs become available. So Orbit's, yeah, again, a great example of that. And programs like that are ones that we're going to look at moving forward for sure. And we've had some great responses. Ridership on Orbit continues to grow, and it has really grown since we launched it. We had a bit of dwindling in January and February, but that's pretty typical for the winter time. And it's only grown from there. And we're seeing a lot of ridership that's surpassing that of Route 2, with most of the growth coming in on the weekends. And part of it is attributable to the fact that Orbit is free, and it will be free for a couple months now. But there was a long period of time during COVID that we offered free service on every route, and we didn't see nearly the same kind of response in ridership. So while free fares are a factor, certainly the draw to Orbit and this new system is a major one as well. Hit the next slide for me. So MetroNext kind of kicked off in earlier this year, and we were able to collaborate a lot with the Chamber and their Connect Go initiative and utilize a lot of the feedback that they got through some of their survey work. And they did a substantial amount of that. And we were able to pull things into 5 different categories, and those are shown on the screen here, of things we want to consider, of things that people want to see from our transit system as we grow. And the first is more frequent bus arrivals, and that goes for all existing routes in the system. The second is better bus stops, including clearer passenger information and more route information. The third is future Orbit lines and a potential future Orbit network, rapid transit network. The fourth is new service types to connect the region. I mentioned the 4 service types that we have right now, and those are the sort of the 4 tools in the toolbox for us, but that doesn't mean that that's all there is available. There are certain areas of town that are more difficult to serve with a fixed route bus, for instance. So maybe there's another option available that we could consider. And then finally, looking at potential service expansion beyond what our network is right now. And so what we did, Evan, next slide, thank you, is we've kind of categorized them into 4 different segments, 4 different sections as we proceed throughout the year. And where we are now, and if you saw or heard our announcement about 24th Street, which we'll talk a little bit about here shortly, is taking a step back and looking at a lot of demographic data and trying to kind of frame out the major lines in the system and essentially build and frame out what our transit network looks like from our major corridor perspective, with the idea there being that a major capital investment will take some time, and we wanted to get the ball rolling on that as soon as possible. So while we do that, we will also be moving forward this year and looking at some of the other items that I just mentioned. So bus arrival frequencies, putting more bus shelters on the street, getting better passenger information out there, tweaks to existing routes that might need to go different places. And finally, what we're hoping to do is have a fleshed out plan with a lot of feedback throughout the way. I should mention that each phase has a segment of public input built into it. That's going to kind of kick off each phase and help guide us as we make some of these determinations. And we hope that the plan is to have a fully fleshed out plan beginning of next year, and that will kind of guide the agency for the next 5 to 10 years to come, with some short-term, medium-term, and some long-term improvements. So we do want to make some quicker changes and then also roll out some more substantial ones like a major capital project. And then I will turn it over to Evan.
All righty. Thanks, Jason. So as you mentioned, we've got a couple different types of service that we offer, and each of them is a little bit different in terms of which transit market they're best suited for. So in terms of orbit lines, we really have to focus those on where it's warranted to have the highest level of service. That's every 10 minutes, service all days of the week, late into the evening, early in the morning. So really that's kind of our premier investment that we want to carefully target where it makes the most sense. Fixed routes provide neighborhood connectivity. Express routes are for those longer trips, typically from the suburbs at a park and ride into the downtown area. And then there's other service types that we want to look at as well. So if anyone has tracked with MetroNext, this map probably looks familiar, but this is something we presented during round 1 back in March. And we worked with MAPA, the planning agency, who shares a building with us, to kind of measure a variety of metrics that influence how likely an area is to sustain or warrant bus service. So there's a bunch of factors going into that, including number of residents, number of destinations, household characteristics, like whether those residents own a car, whether they're low income or a minority, whether they have folks with a disability in the household, because we know all of those factors will cause people to be more likely to use transit near them. And then the built environment was another component. So that's looking to see if the neighborhood has sidewalks. And so for neighborhoods that kind of check all those boxes, you'll see them show up as red. And each of these little grid hexagons is a half-mile wide. So if you can imagine a bus stop placed at the center, the ones that are in red are the ones that are most likely to have high ridership. Those that are orange are kind of in that mid-range. And then the gold color, we know that there's some level of transit demand, but it's not probably enough to warrant a fixed. So especially the gold areas, we are carefully considering the best ways for our agency to respond, especially given our budget, to ensure that people can access opportunities, and especially with the folks in mind that have very limited options, if not services that we offer. So this map has been really foundational to our work and has carried through to help us determine which services best apply to different areas.
I might jump in there real quick too. Sure. Evan mentioned the kind of within our budget, and that's one thing to kind of call on, because I think if we had it our way, we could send service to every single part of the city all over the place. But within that sort of limited budget, we have to be a little more, we have to be very strategic about where these things go. So when it comes to offering a new line or a new route or a new type of service, currently we we would have to make adjustments elsewhere. And so that's part of this MetroNext initiative would be, how can we expand it without taking it away from anywhere else, essentially.
Yep. So Yeah, during round one, we had a public input opportunity for people to recommend different lines to be studied for future orbit investment. And so we ended up with a list of 15 different corridors that we wanted to screen through and consider, so that we had kind of a methodical way to measure which ones should rise to the top. And so if you've seen the recent news, you'll know that the result was selecting 24th Street, which is that north and south connection. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but from our South Transit Center near 30th and Q up to our North Omaha Transit Center at 30th and Ames. And the connection in between is on 24th Street. So I'll talk through a little bit of how we arrived at selecting that corridor as opposed to some of these others listed here. One of the first things we did working with our board of directors was kind of talk about what are the qualities of orbit that have been most successful and have resonated most with riders, and what are those qualities that we want to make sure we retain with any future service. Because the temptation would be to start adding new orbit lines, and we don't want to see our product watered down as we go. So how do we take the bar that's already set at a pretty high level that the community is excited about and ensure that any future orbit line kind of raises that bar? So we worked with the board to set up kind of minimum standards for each of these 10 items. And the items on the left side are branding, frequency, span of service, all-door boarding, and corridor length. And those are all kind of the like givens that we know any future orbit line is going to beat the orange branding. It's going to run every 10 minutes during rush hour. It's going to have the same span of service that we operate on Dodge, a board from all doors. And then the corridor length, we're looking at between 5 to 15 miles for any future line. So 24th checks all those boxes. The other column here shows the factors that will vary depending on where we operate. So potential for dedicated bus lanes. Obviously, that's different from 24th versus 30th versus West Dodge, some of those other corridors on the list. So as part of our screening process, we did a high-level assessment of bus lane potential and then assigned like a value or a score to each of these corridors. Transit signal priority is another thing that we looked at. Assuming that we were able to get the technology installed at all the signals, how likely that was to contribute to improved travel. We also considered the right-of-way width. Oh, Jason, do you have something?
I was just going to say transit signal priority, for those that don't know, is it's where we can have a chip essentially in the traffic cabinet, and our buses send a signal to that traffic cabinet and it can hold a green light for us. So transit signal priority combined with dedicated bus lanes is one of the critical factors on the Dodge Street orbit line to make sure that we can maintain a high level of service. So we're not being slowed down at intersections as much. And so that we have in the downtown loop, at least we have some dedicated space to access the stations. So that's, like Evan said, something we would look for moving forward.
Yep. And I should probably clarify the dedicated bus lanes for Dodge Street, about 11% of the full corridor has the lanes, which is probably, it sounds a little bit low to most people. It's definitely something that we wanted to be higher. But at least for now, with our board, we agreed that any future line should have at least 10% of the corridor as dedicated lanes. Obviously, we would love to see higher than 50%, even 100% of the corridor be exclusive right-of-way. And we've seen really cool examples in other cities of that. But at least for now and for the state that we're in, we're wanting to at least are at the same threshold as we had for Dodge Street. So going back through the rest of these on the list, station amenities, we have heard a lot of feedback from riders that the stations are kind of a game changer for their experience versus riding a regular bus. So we want to make sure any future line actually has enough right-of-way that we can put those full-size stations in as many places as possible. We also want the station spacing to be in the range of an average of half a mile between the stations. And that will vary based on conditions and ridership and factors that would be determined in a further study. But on average, we want to commit to about every half mile. And then we also want to ensure that pedestrian access is good at every stop. So those kind of put together the 10 principles that we carried forward in our evaluation process. So listed on this sheet, I've got on the left side, things that we screened in the initial screening process. So that's the number of people and jobs served, access to essential services, walkability in the built environment, what percentage of the corridor served an area of persistent poverty, which is an FTA definition that we worked with. And then also looking at the percent of minority population along the corridor. And we wanted to make an early commitment to equity. That for the Dodge Street project, we ended up investing about $37 million in the corridor. And to do another investment of that size in our community, we really thought it was appropriate to prioritize areas that are historically underinvested, because we know that transit can be a really important component to better connecting and kind of energizing the economy of those local areas. And then on the right side is the items that we looked at in advanced screening. So after kind of weighing that first group of metrics, we advanced 8 corridors out of the 15, do kind of a more in-depth analysis. So that's where we looked at the speed and reliability opportunities. We did a high-level estimate of where we would put the stations based on ridership distribution. We also looked at travel patterns to determine whether people riding the current bus route in that area are likely to benefit from a BRT type of investment. And what that means is, I'm trying to think of a good way to convey that. If we see a strong trend of people traveling beyond that corridor, or like 30th Street, for example, was a corridor we looked at, but most of the riders using Route 30 today have a destination downtown. So we kind of determined that if we were to convert just 30th Street to an orbit line and kind of force a connection to the Dodge orbit line at 30th and Dodge, that some riders would view that as a downgrade in service, as it's not a direct ride as it used to be. I'm going into the weeds here, sorry. So we also looked at development potential, the amount of right-of-way available along the corridor, on-street parking constraints, and then looked at cost effectiveness of what is the projected amount of investment and how does that compare to the product that you end up with. Connectivity to the rest of the transit network was another piece of that puzzle. So when we put all those factors together, that's when we kind of ended up with a list of a couple top corridors that we thought were worth some additional consideration. So what we did after that was met with what ended up being dozens of community and civic organizations that were kind of in the local area so that we could present our results and say, here's what the numbers are telling us that we should prioritize. Does that make sense? Are we on the right track? And it also helped us to kind of shape and provide input from locals that are in the area, know the community well, elected officials, those organizations that have a lot of clients or customers that would benefit from investment like this. So especially as those conversations occurred with organizations up and down 24th Street, momentum built pretty fast. A lot of people said, you know, this makes sense. This is something that's long overdue. We're happy to help. And so as that momentum continued, that's what kind of solidified 24th Street as our next corridor. So here's a map of that corridor again, relative to Dodge Street. And I will note that we've got this like dotted line of 30th Street from the MCC Fort campus through our North Transit Center all the way down to 30th and Dodge. So knowing that 24th Street has pretty limited opportunity for bus lanes, at least at this point of the study, we wanted to keep kind of a backdoor option that we may jog over to 30th to have a little bit more right of way to work with. It's probably not our preferred alignment because typically with transit, straight lines are best. But at least at this stage of the study, we wanted to keep the option. So this slide here shows just a few of the different destinations up and down 24th. You've got, several museums, Joslin Art Museum, the Union for Contemporary Art, Museo Latino. We've got medical connections, libraries, the Creighton University campus, arts organizations, service organizations. Just really, as you look at it closer, it's like, wow, everything is on 24th. We've got the North 24th Street BID, South Omaha Business District for the South 24th community. We've met with both of those organizations and see a lot of agreement and alignment in terms of the future direction that we'd like to see for the corridor. So this slide may be a little bit in the weeds, but I'll share it anyway. The timeline of what we're looking at for this transit study is to kind of kick it off next year, assuming that we're able to secure the funding. The full cost of the study is $3.3 million, so it's definitely not cheap. And the end result will be completing 30% design documents. And so really what needs to happen first is for us to kind of review some base level alternatives and decide together with the community which alternative we prefer. So it may not even be orbit. If we are working with the community and they really say, we like our stops close to each other, we don't want to see the half-mile spacing, or they have other factors about orbit that they're not interested in, we may decide that a different type of investment is the most appropriate. So we're not like pre-decided on what the outcome will be, but we know whatever rises to the top through this process is what we're going to build in the end. So once we have that selected, we'll also do environmental review, which tends to take some time. We've allotted 6 months in our timeline for that work itself. And then preliminary engineering is kind of the more technical side of once we know what we're building, you have to do the design drawings of the stations and other amenities, bus lanes. If there are any, you have to do traffic studies and all that kind of thing. So through this whole process, we're expecting public involvement to keep the community updated, and then hoping to complete that process by the end of 2023. So I'm sure for a lot of folks, that sounds like an eternity to still just be studying. But I will remind everyone that the Dodge Orbit line was like an 8 to 9 year process from start to finish. So we're really at step 1 for 24th Street. But as Jason mentioned earlier, through MetroNext, we wanted to kind of expedite this process, knowing that so many people have been asking, what are we going to do as our next line? And so we want to get that process started so that we're not losing time as we wait to invest in our next program. So that kind of wraps up the MetroNext stuff.
Yeah, if I can jump in there real quick, just to kind of bring it, to bring it back to the kind of overall timeline. So that, again, is like the initial component, the first phase of MetroNext. But in the next few phases, we are going to be looking at like frequency improvements, signage improvements. So while this particular study and longer term capital investment might take some time, we are going to look to like quicker things that we can put out on the street and to make things more accessible. One of them being, the fare upgrade system, for instance, and that's something that we'll be actually tackling later later this year. So we're kind of staggering things out as we can, really trying to get them out the door as quick as possible.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. It's kind of like when you cook dinner and like some elements take longer, so you start them first, and then there's other things that you can be working on while that's cooking in the background. So yeah, we're trying to keep all these things moving, and there's definitely other items that we think we can deliver in a shorter time frame. So the next round of MetroNext that we'll have public conversations for will be early this fall, kind of talking about not just 24th, but what is the big picture of all of our bus routes and potential changes that we're considering for that network. And so there will be opportunities to provide feedback for all of our fixed routes in our next round. So stay tuned for information about that. We think we'd like to do in-person and virtual options for that engagement. So hopefully that makes it easy for lots of folks to have a say. So in terms of short-term quick improvements, the Market to Midtown bikeway is an exciting example of that. We've got this pilot project that just had the ribbon cutting ceremony earlier today. And so that runs on Harney Street from Turner Boulevard all the way, eventually it'll be all the way to 11th Street. So really connecting all the way to the old market, providing separated, safe, two-way bike movement. And then the next lane adjacent to that is a parking lane plus our passenger loading areas for the bus stops. So we've been coordinating through the Smart Cities program, which is kind of a grouping of different public agencies and private organizations, really working towards what low-hanging fruit or what projects can we do to make a smarter use of our public infrastructure. And knowing that the traditional approach is these like year-long, expensive, slow-moving projects like Orbit, what can we do faster than that to make faster progress and show results that can be studied and improved on, and kind of have this iterative process that tests out new ideas. So that's exactly what this bikeway is. It's definitely done more on the cheap end and the fast end of a project like this. So the striping and the bollards are not as substantial of infrastructure as you might expect for a project like this. And that's really by design. That had we pushed and waited to get that level of infrastructure, we probably would 5 years from now still not have a bikeway. But here we are. We're trying it for a year and a half. And so our communication to riders has been that during this pilot phase, we're asking people to wait along the curb next to the bus stop. And then when the bus arrives, the driver knows to look for people, to park in the lane and kind of wait for them to take the crosswalk out into the loading zone. So that's shown on this diagram. We're hoping to kind of measure and see how it goes. And so we've got a year and a half to gather feedback from drivers, from passengers, from cyclists, adjacent business owners, kind of everyone in the community to figure out what's working and what's not, and make a case for a permanent investment. So, yeah, that will be something interesting to watch unfold. And I think there's a lot of other places where this type of treatment could be applied. But, exciting to finally have a bikeway in Omaha. And I know there's some comments coming through, but I can't see them. But that might be a good, oh, sorry.
I just said one of them was from me. I just dropped a link into the Metro Smart Cities website. They have a survey on their website, so it's a great place to provide feedback. And feel free to submit anything related to the bus experience there too, or just you can send those on to us as well.
Yep, thanks. So we've got a couple different ways to connect with us: Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter. We've also got our website, ometro.com/MetroNext, which is where you'll see the most current updates on our process for this year. So with that kind of wraps up everything that we were planning to present. I'm sure there's questions or things that you guys would like to discuss further. So at this point, we'll kind of open it up for that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Evan and Jason. I think that was great. It's really exciting to hear about the new corridors you all are considering. I see some clapping. And excited that you all are working on the mid-market to midtown bikeway. I know MoTrift has been advocating for that for like 10 years. So it's really exciting to see that it's finally happened. Kimra, I see you raised your hand.
I did. And let me just preface all my questions by saying that both Jason and Evan, I truly appreciate a whole lot, because they have always made themselves accessible to me, because I am definitely one who uses my voice. And so as a regular bus rider, I just want you both to know that I really appreciate your willingness to communicate with me. I know that I often have complaints, but I also try to talk about the good things that happen with Metro as well. My first question is, earlier you mentioned the board members knowing what resonated with riders, and I was really curious as to how the board members gathered information to know what resonated with riders. I don't know how much communication there is with board members and riders. I'm wondering, do they do a survey or is it coming from the surveys you're doing and they're just kind of reading them?
Yeah, so that process honestly was just kind of based on, I guess you would say, their own experiences on orbit, what they had heard from folks that they've talked to, what we've heard and what we've shared with the board in terms of since opening, how things have gone month to month, what we're seeing in terms of online comments. So it wasn't necessarily a targeted survey of what do you like or dislike about orbit. It was just kind of like, based on what we've seen and what's working so far, what do we want to make sure that we retain for future service?
Okay. And then I'm wondering, do you know how much space is between the stops right now?
So Dodge, the average spacing is, sorry, go ahead.
4th Street.
For 24th Street. It really depends on the location. In some cases, they're like every block. In most cases, they're every other block. So a half mile in Omaha would be 6 blocks.
Okay. And so then if 24th Street were to have an orbit would be the only transportation from Metro?
So that's probably the most likely outcome. But kind of knowing that, I mean, anybody who's familiar with our system, or even if you haven't ridden, anyone in Omaha knows that 24th Street is very different than Dodge Street. You know, Dodge in some places is 8 lanes wide, and 24th is much more of a like neighborhood compact street. So right away, we know that the service that we offer and the way we would apply the principles of orbit is going to look different along 24th. Mm-hmm. So I kind of skimmed over in terms of the average spacing. We want it to be around 0.5 or every half mile, but our principle, if you look it up, is actually from 0.35 to 0.65. So we're allowing a range, and we're anticipating that 24th will kind of be on the closer end. So more like every 4 blocks.
Okay.
But we would have to determine exactly where ridership warrants the closer spacing, because there's this balance of like, once you're on the bus, every stop between you and your destination is like, I'm never going to get there. So everyone wants their stop close to them, but then they want to go as fast as they can to their destination. So we're trying to balance that experience for every rider and kind of group everybody in a logical way.
Okay. And then would it then go to the North Omaha and the South Omaha Transit Center then? Is that where it would?
Yep.
Would they have the transit centers at all because of that?
Sorry, you cut out a little bit.
Oh, would they have to change the transit centers at all because of that?
So it would probably be similar to like out at our Westroads Transit Center. We have like an extension that was built onto it for the Orbit platform.
Okay,
so we would
on quite a bit, so I'm familiar. So good.
Okay. Yep.
And then you mentioned earlier possibly going to 30th Street. What would be the reasons that that might happen?
Honestly, it would be if there's community support for that or community preference. Also, if the city is unable to secure space for bus lanes along 24th. So the segment that we're exploring at this point is between Leavenworth and Chicago Street. So just south of Creighton's campus. That's the section of 24th Street today that is a separate one-way pair. So 24th is northbound and then 25th is southbound traffic only. And if you look at the traffic volumes, either of those streets should only be one lane. And in both cases, they have, 24th in one segment has 4 lanes northbound, and 24th Ave is 3 lanes. And so there should be, from a technical perspective, excess capacity that could be designated for transit. During the study, if we determine that for whatever reason we can't use those lanes for transit, then we would probably need to kind of step back and reevaluate what's the best solution. Because if we are truly committed to 10% of the corridor has to be bus lanes and we can't get that on 24th, then that would automatically kick us 30th.
Okay. And that would be assuming that Orbit would be the solution, because I think that's one of the things that we heard a lot about in round 1 of MetroNext is, like Orbit's a great investment, and there are a ton of places along 24th Street that we don't want to space people out of. So that'll be a huge piece of the planning portion, especially with that community engagement piece, to figure out, where people are traveling, where people want to travel, and then, would they be open to a different kind of a spacing? That'll be a really critical piece for us.
Yep.
So like Kimra, we'll plug in with you guys for sure to get some of that feedback.
Yeah, like Jason mentioned, if we were to come to that critical point where we're either deciding if we want this to be Orbit, we can't keep it on 24th, or do we want to stay on 24th and have kind of a BRT light type of investment that doesn't meet our principles? And we're open to the conversation. Either outcome, I think, would be a benefit. And so at that point, it's just like, what do we as a community want among those options?
Well, this isn't a question, more so a comment, but you put some slides up, which I found very interesting, that showed a lot of the different stops that exist between North and South Omaha. And as we talk about ridership, I think that, continuing to try to encourage people to use the bus. And I think that that's a really, really great storytelling piece right there that possibly could encourage ridership. Because as I think about you all coming to Sona, I remember hearing people kind of complaining because they don't ride the bus. But maybe even as you get out to the community more, even with the presentations, maybe something in there that really shows the benefits of ridership for people who maybe don't normally do it, but they may not really, people don't really think outside of the box, but those 2 slides I thought were really, really powerful when it comes to like the benefits, because there is a lot to see between North and South, and including the fact that there are 2 libraries, right? So I thought that was really powerful. So thank you both. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, Kimra, just a couple of things that while you were talking, I was thinking about it. One of the other pieces that we have been doing in the past and hope to ramp up more is some like rider training, and MoShift has done a fantastic job too of doing like ride the bus with us events. It's been awesome. And I think, one of the barriers for people is just considering it, just personally, I didn't, before I worked at Metro, I worked at UNO and didn't really think about taking the bus until they rolled out the MavRide program for all staff. And so I started taking the bus that way. And it's a learning process. As you know, it's a different style of travel that you kind of have to learn and get used to. Mm-hmm. And so, what we're trying to do more of is more education on and trying to help people consider what it's like to ride the bus, what it would mean for their travel, for their week. And so we've been doing more of that. And if there's more opportunities, if anyone on this call or outside of this call sees an opportunity for us to do that and encourage folks to ride the bus, that's what we want to do more of, because it is really helpful to, like, I'll give you an example. I think a couple of weeks ago, we did a great session with the Latino Center for the Midlands and took a group of like 30 students. And a lot of them were just like, I never considered it before. But by virtue of that event and like having people that walk through the process with, I think that kind of triggers it for some people. So ride the bus with us, you keep that going for sure. And we will do the same. And the other piece about 24th Street, it is a historic transit corridor. It was developed along streetcar lines. It's really accessible and walkable. And a lot of the development and the built environment reflects that to this day. And I think that's why you see successful areas of town like the South 24th District and the North 24th District, because they're built in a way that it's meant to support people traveling rather than just vehicles. So that's just another one of the reasons that that 24th would be a successful orbit or enhanced, corridor of some sort. But I also want to say I appreciate all your feedback and keep it up. It's super, super valuable to us. So.
Awesome. I have to run, but Jason, I'd love to talk to you some more about some stuff too, but I have to run and have a meeting, but this was really, really good.
Yep. I got your email. We'll get together soon.
Well,
thanks, y'all.
Yep. Thank you.
And Jason, Evan, we may, like we do the ride the bus with us, which is wonderful, but you might consider doing like, Metro ride the bus, like just teaching the people, because you guys have a lot more access to people like who ride the bus and like, or want to ride the bus, but they don't know how to. And like, so the videos that you guys did are very educational, but still people, they're idiots and they just don't know how to ride it. And they're like, well, I have a car, I can ride it. And it's so expensive. And so you might consider just teaming up and just not just have us do it, which we're happy to do, but just have us be like, Metro, be like, here, ride with Metro, and have like you and with some other people and us, and that might be something to consider. I'm not telling you to do it, but just because we're happy to do it, but you might have to ride with us. And
yeah, no, like, and it's a great
Metro. So
absolutely, no, it's a great point for sure. Yeah, and traditionally in the last few years, we've been kind of taking that to organizations instead of hosting it. And I hate to blame everything on the pandemic, but we were looking at doing some more hosted at our facility, and gathering people got to be a little dicey. So that's definitely on the radar, and we'll reach out to you all and plug in and see where we can kind of collaborate.
Yeah, and on that note, I also see Cindy's note in the chat about a tour a couple of years ago of 24th Street. And I think it would be a really fun way to kind of build excitement around our next corridor to do like a ride the bus with us event that's like looking at some of these destinations up and down 24. So
yeah,
that'd be a fun thing to maybe partner with MoShift to promote.
That's a good idea, Evan. All right, I see Lee, I think, has her hand raised, so I guess I'm going to pass it to her. But if other folks have questions, if you want to put them in the chat or raise your hand, I will call on you.
Hey, thank you. It's Leah Fenton. This is my first meeting. I was so excited about the 24th Street expansion that I randomly came across that you're having a meeting right now. So I'm just curious, what's the path to making this happen in terms of like citizen engagement? Like, I honestly don't really understand. Obviously it has to do with the transportation budget, but like in terms of us reaching out and support as like citizens, like how should we do that?
Yeah, so at this point, we're still fundraising for the study, and we're looking at like federal grant opportunities or local grants that would support that. I don't know that there's anything specific that like you as a citizen would need to take action on at this time. But for sure, once the study begins, we'll be looking for a lot of feedback. So
the city, they won't fund the study.
They may like contribute in part,
okay,
but we're not really like expecting that. So yeah, I think as we're putting funding together, just broad support, generally speaking, for public transportation is a good, like, it's actually been really interesting. So because I've been at Metro for a while, I remember how the Dodge Street corridor study began, and just the public conversation with that one. I think we lost probably 2 years of that process, just educating people on what BRT is and why we would want to build it in the first.
Okay. Can I ask how much the study costs?
Yeah, sorry. So the study will be 3.3 million.
Okay.
All said and done. And that gets us to 30% design. So then after that, we would still need to complete final design and then construction, which is typically a separate process.
Okay.
And so, we bring up
part of the slides that were presented earlier.
We bring up that slide. I think it gives a pretty good visual. Yeah, and
I have a related question to the like funding and cost. You guys didn't mention anything, or I didn't see anything about the regional transit authority, and I know Mochif worked to, lobby for that at the federal, or not at the state level, and was
get the governor's override.
Right, and then the governor tried to veto it. But can you guys share anything about that?
Yeah, so sorry, I'm trying to figure out why my slides aren't back now. The Regional Transit Authority legislation passed, spring of 2019, and then the pandemic hit, and it was like, we can't even touch that for a while. But really, our approach at this point is we want to make sure before we have any public conversation about converting to a regional authority, we want to kind of have our ducks in the row about how we're planning to expand in the future, so that if anybody is considering this switch from a city authority to a regional authority, they kind of know what the change will bring about for all neighborhoods.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense, because the cities around Omaha would have to opt in to be a part of that. But part of that would allow you all to reset the property tax amount, which the state has limited. There's like a lid law that prevents it from increasing more than a certain percentage, no matter how many people live in Omaha, no matter how much the population increases, the amount of the property tax, can only increase a little bit. So that would allow you all to reset that amount potentially and really sort of increase that funding and the per capita, and move us up versus all those cities that you showed on the graph of the per capita spending, where we're basically at the bottom.
So that's definitely, anytime you change taxes, it's a very careful and calculated decision that needs to be transparent. So that's kind of why we're going through this exercise of talking to the community, confirming that yes, people do truly want us to be investing more than we are today. And if we were to invest, what would that look like? What services would we expect as a result? What new communities would we serve? All those questions have to be answered before we would feel ready to kind of pull the trigger on any legislative or governmental, just like becoming a regional.
Yeah, and that decision lies with our board ultimately. So that's kind of the path that it would go up. So it would be a lot of coordination with them. Was it Leah? I do want to go back because you were asking how to stay engaged. You can see on the screen that the public involvement process, at least right now, our projected one would be like mid next year. But throughout this year, we're still going to be looking for feedback through our MetroNext process. And Evan, maybe you can go back to that last slide. I'm not sure if you caught these, Leah, or if anyone else came on a little later.
Which slide, sorry?
Just the final one with the link to the website.
Okay.
So ometro.com/MetroNext kind of outlines what we're doing this year and looking at things broader than just 24th Street, how we improve the rest of our service. So plug in with us there throughout the rest of this year. Whenever the plan, the public engagement portion of the 24th Street plan comes to the point where we're reaching out, plug in there. But I would say keep up with MoShift because they do a lot of good work. And a lot of the energy, I think, and a lot of the momentum around a lot of our transportation initiatives don't really stand alone. They all kind of work together. So like the bikeway gives us really good momentum for more energy around transit. It's been kind of a build over the past few years of a variety of different transit projects and transportation projects to make things better. So, I think the more projects we could keep pushing, it kind of lifts everything together. So keep doing what you're doing right now and stay tuned for sure. There was a question in the chat from Ryan. He asked if it's possible to integrate the GPS tracking of the buses with Google Maps for trip planning. Evan can speak to Google a little more specifically, I think, but we do have a system called MyRide OMA, and I'll drop the link in the chat there. MyRide is our real-time bus tracking system. And there is a trip planner on that as well. And I think, Evan, you can speak to this better than myself. With GTFS real-time, I sent that to Madeline, sorry. Madeline, you can have the information too, but I'll make sure I send it to everyone.
And I love MyRide, and as a visually impaired blind person who uses voiceover with the iPhone a lot, it works beautifully. So yeah,
good.
It's great. It works wonderful.
That is wonderful to hear. So good. Okay, cool. So there is a trip planning element in MyRide. I think there's potential to bring that over to Google. That's a connection between with Google that I don't know much about. But then one of the elements of our new fare payment system is also going to have some of the trip planning and bus tracking features too. So we're going to have these two systems that are live at the same time. And what we're going to try to do is gauge what people like about MyRide, what people like about the new system, and get some feedback and see what works for folks. So, Ryan, did that answer your question? Did that? And maybe Evan has more details on Google. Sorry.
So I don't have a ton of additional information on the Google real-time update, but we're trying to plug them into our MyRide system so that they can, once the two systems are talking to each other, then you could go to Google Maps, plan a trip, and get real-time updates on that trip. And they have that available in other cities. So it's just a matter of once their system has the continuous stream of information from our system, then we'll be good to go. I'm not super techie, so I don't know what the hang up has been, but I know those two entities are working to make that connection. And I'm seeing that John has had his hand up for quite a while, so maybe we'll go to him next.
Hi, I just had how do I kind of
Oh, looks like you may have muted yourself.
Am I still muted?
Nope, we can hear you. Oh,
okay.
We're unmuted. There we go. Now try talking.
I'm new to this. I had an idea as we're talking. You're mentioning the interval between stops and the trade-off between frequency of stops and actually getting to your destination. Would it be possible, if you're running the orbit line on 24th Street, to say run A, B, and C routes of the same route, and so that the distance remains amenable, but by the buses following each other with this assigned schedule, then people could opt for the A, B, or C bus, knowing where it's stopping, whether it's their stop or not, and then they would get to their destination quicker. Would that be a possibility? Do you understand what I'm talking about?
I think so. So there's other cities that have like a skip stop type of system. And it's usually like you'll have one pattern where it's really for the long distance. So it may make one stop downtown, a couple interim stops, and then kind of leapfrog other buses to get out to the end of the line faster. And then it has other trips that make more of the local BRT stops.
Well, it doesn't have to be that kind of trade-off, does it? I mean, couldn't you maintain the intervals, but just you have 3 buses at 10-minute intervals, but the stops that the bus A is making are different than the stops that bus B is making, and bus B is making different stops than C and A. So that if your stop is a B stop, then you know you're going to get to your destination quickly because it's only stopping every half a mile. And you still be serving 3 times as many stops by not skipping anyone and not having a separate. Do you understand what I'm saying? Am I communicating this well?
Yeah, I think so. So like all of them would do half-mile spacing, but
exactly.
They'd be staggered between each other.
And with different stops for each half-mile spacing.
Yeah, so that's definitely something that could be evaluated during the study. Off of first glance, the issues that I see are, what if somebody boards at an A stop and they went off at a B stop? Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's almost impossible to predict where the individual trips are going to be.
Oh, I see.
So we can't always guarantee that it's going to be an improvement for folks. The other component is if we were hypothetically able to get an A, B, and C line that addresses that consideration. And the other piece is, if only the A line works for me, then it doesn't matter that the other buses come every 10 minutes. I have to wait for the A bus, which is every 30 minutes, because it would be every third bus.
Sure. Well,
so it kind of diminishes the value of the frequent service. So we would have to carefully consider something like that. But you're right. It's like so many different trade-offs that we have to factor. And it looks like Clyde might have some input on that too. So chime in if you want.
I just, on that, on Chicago has A-B stops on some of their subways, which works good if the trains run every couple of minutes. And but then when the spacing or headways get further apart, all the trains make all the stops. So once you get above about 7 or 8 minute headways, they go to all trains make all stops. So you got to have really close headways to make that kind of a system work. But no, my question had to do, I don't get to ride the Orbit very often. I primarily use 15 and 18. But one stop that I've had some problems at is 24th and Dodge, the westbound Orbit stop. And I think that Omaha Metro needs to get with Jeff Subject, our new Vision Zero coordinator. That is really a dangerous intersection to cross Dodge at to get to that Orbit stop, because you got southbound traffic on 24th, not looking for pedestrians that are all pouring into a right turn movement. Many of them looking for the opportunity to turn immediately left and head south. And so I personally think there's no good justification for having a one-way couple for that short distance. They just ought to go back to making that two-way straight on through. And I think that would make it safer for pedestrians too.
Yeah, that's that island cross, isn't it? Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That double right turn lane is crazy. And people aren't really expecting pedestrians. They're in a big hurry to make that right turn followed by the quick left. So you see a lot of interesting behavior from drivers and pedestrians. Luckily, the benefit of doing the 24th corridor study is we can incorporate that issue into our work so that whatever infrastructure upgrades we come up with can address that at the same time. So it would improve the experience on Dodge and on 24. The other component of that is the city has already done, they are just wrapping up a study where they looked at a possible two-way conversion of 24th. And they also looked at considerations for upgrades to complete the bike lane connections because that segment of 24th currently has a gap from Leavenworth to Chicago. So there's a lot of overlap in terms of things being studied at the same time. And we've had early conversations with the city about linking up their work with ours and potentially even being able to combine our capital projects to get it all funded and built sooner than we would if it were uncoordinated.
That's good.
Also, I only have 2 10-ride tickets left, so I'd be glad to be a volunteer for the new card system.
Great. I'll sign you up, Clyde.
Oh, Clyde would be a good one.
Yeah, for sure. And well, I want to say too, John, we appreciate the brainstorming. That's like what's so fun, I think, about part of this process is like what other ideas can we bring into the picture? And that's the kind of stuff I think we'll definitely be looking for in the planning phase too of, what other concepts could we consider to make it really accessible? There probably are a couple other questions. I think Ryan had something else before we jumped. Ryan, did you have another addition to your question? I want to make sure we cover it.
No, that was good.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Well, and yeah, Clyde, I think that was a great question. Evan, did you said the city was doing a study on two-way 24th? Did they decided they want to move to change it, or they're still?
So it was a concept study, which means they haven't identified any funding to build it. It's like the first step to get a project into the capital improvement program. So the results of the study kind of compared 3 different alternatives, and it said the community prefers a two-way conversion of 24.
Oh, wow, that's great.
So that's the study recommendation. But from there, they'll have to split it up into several different phases of construction projects that could make that all happen.
Okay, cool. Thanks for that update. And then, yeah, Clyde, I think that's a good point. I don't know if Omaha has any lights right now that, like other cities have lights where pedestrians and cyclists get, go first, or have a lead time. I'm not sure if we have any lights that do that right now, but that seems like an easy thing potentially that could help in that intersection, or you could just have time where, more time for pedestrians when the cars are not going.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And probably something that reaching out to Jeff with the city could be a consideration, that you can retime the signal a lot faster than you can make curb changes and other adjustments. So if you're able to, so that what you're talking about of giving the pedestrians an early crossing is called like daylighting the pedestrian signal. So that's certainly something that could be considered as a short-term step to make it more accessible. Other questions?
John. I just had one thing. I lived in Denver years ago, and they had a system there at busy crosswalks where all traffic would stop, and pedestrians could all cross in any direction they chose. And I gave them that priority, which I thought was great for bicycles and pedestrians. And maybe something could be done here under could be dangerous intersections. I don't know.
Yeah, so that's called a Pedestrian Scramble. So it allows pedestrians to basically cross catty corner, which saves them a lot of time. If you're like 72nd and Dodge, where you have to go across one leg, which may take several minutes, and then wait for your turn again and cross the other leg, that type of treatment stops all vehicle traffic so that you can cross in any direction. And so it's definitely safer. It's better for the pedestrian. but that time savings comes at the expense of drivers. And so I'm guessing the city would need to see pretty substantial evidence of a high volume of pedestrians relative to auto traffic. So like a downtown section or areas where there's lots of events is probably where that type of treatment is most likely to happen. And yeah, so you're reading between the lines. Public Works probably won't allow that at 72nd Dodge, unfortunately.
Yeah, Cindy knows. She's shaking her head. Is there anybody else who hasn't asked a question? Melinda, were you gonna unmute? No, okay.
I was just gonna say I'll start going to that Chipotle 100 times a day, so there's more pedestrians there.
There we go. Yep, Chipotle will appreciate it too.
Anybody else? I guess I could say, or Ryan, do you want to say something about the SPIN grant? Just a quick mention of that. I know you're connecting with Jason and Evan about that, which is great. I think we want to help be a part of a study and help study Orbit's effectiveness.
Yeah. So
Try now.
we're in the same room here. Creighton Social Science Data Lab that I'm a part of is partners with ModeShift and now the city and B-Cycle on a grant funded by the Spin Scooter folks. And the main thing we're getting through that is access to 3 different data tools, one of which is Street View data, which is, from what I can tell, scraped from cell phones to map where people are going. So it's like destination and location and travel mode. So we'd be glad to look at that data and share with you guys for looking at kind of how trips, what it can tell us about trips along the 24th corridor. The other is Numina sensors. It's like basically like a video camera that goes up on a pole, but then processes the data so you can see every type of traveler passing through that area. So it can identify pedestrians, bikes, cars, trucks, and buses. And you get kind of a color-coded map that shows you the pathway of each group, and you can slice it apart and you can look at it animated for close passes, all kinds of stuff. And we wanted to use that to look at a couple of at least one or two orbit stops to help advocate for the city investing and improving its policies around that transportation infrastructure. So that might be someplace like 72nd and Dodge or over, I forget the intersection where the Best Buy is, to help ensure that success. So that's what the other thing we're looking at. The third data set's kind of weird. I won't go into it. It's from Ford vehicles that make extreme braking or turns, but it's only on newer models, which are probably more expensive. And we talked a couple times ago about how more expensive vehicles behave differently.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. And I just realized that you're the person I've been emailing with for our meeting on Friday. Looking forward to that. And actually, sorry to like drag everyone else into this conversation, but I told you that I wasn't available Friday. I was confused. I looked at the wrong day of my calendar. So Friday at 10 still works, and we're excited to kind of think through the best way to apply those pieces of technology, gather some good.
Yeah, so anybody with ModeShift who wants to help on our end, drop me a line. I'm on the Slack. This is teaching me how to work it.
Sounds like Clyde might have another question.
Yeah, I just, a couple of the people that I ride with on the 15 have been complaining that they now have limited opportunities to work night shift because they eliminated the last number 15 run, which I understand. You got budget constraints and also driver availability is a problem. But one thing they complained about, everybody's complaining, including the governor, that we've got all these jobs available and nobody wants to work them, but they don't seem to point out the transportation limitations a lot of low-paid workers have, and that they have to rely on public transportation. They can't afford these on-demand services. They pretty much have to use transit or rely on friends providing transportation. And I think that if Omaha Metro can get some more publicity to that fact, because like cheap cars aren't available. Used cars are very expensive. So when people's transportation breaks down and they have to rely on other modes, it's a real problem keeping people from being able to get jobs.
Yeah, for sure. And honestly, I feel like in the time that I've worked in the field, that conversation has gotten so much better, especially through Connect Go. It's incredible to have the Chamber of Commerce really being the ones to champion and call out that you've got this economic pinch because so many of our employers want to expand and can't hire enough people. And they recognize that, you know, they'll offer a job and the person the candidate they select says, I don't actually have transportation out there. So those major employers are the ones standing up now saying, we need more public transportation because it's affecting me. Even if I don't ride, my employees need to ride. So I think that top-down support is like night and day different than I've experienced in the past. So I think people from all levels of the community really saying, yes, we need more public transportation. That's how we truly get there. And honestly, the coverage from the World Herald that we've had, other media sources, it seems like there's a lot of support building. So, that's
cool. Well, thanks everyone. I guess it's 8:30. Lots of good questions. I guess people can, I'll stay for a second if people want to continue to chat in the chat or have any sort of final things. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.